My trauma is bigger than yours. According to the English dictionary, trauma is defined as a distressing or disturbing experience that happened to an individual or a community. With that definition, it's reasonable to assume that most, if not all of us, will experience trauma at some point in our lives. Yet, it remains the biggest elephant in the room, in our homes, and in our communities. Most of us are roaming this earth with unresolved trauma, resembling scenes from the hit series, The Walking Dead. During my awakening, which really means I was going through a crisis, I attended a number of personal development workshops and seminars, as you do. I attended this one seminar where a number of people took to the stage to share their life experiences. This one gentleman who appeared to look in his 40s took to the stage. Initially, he appeared timid and vulnerable. I was in awe of his courage to share an incident that had happened to him in kindergarten. It was take your pet to school day, and he had decided to take his goldfish that was happily swimming in a glass bowl. He was so excited to talk about it to his classmates. As he stood in line, ready to go into the classroom, the school bully walked up, looked at him, and smacked the bowl out of his hand, causing it to fall to the ground, crash, and sadly, his fish died. On that day, unable to save his pet, that little boy decided that he was not enough. As I listened to his story, I found myself getting emotional, and I rarely do. I was so sad that that little boy at age 5 or 6 years old made the decision that he wasn't enough. As the man sobbed on the stage, he explained that as a result of that incident, he had become closed off in most of his relationships. So much so, his marriage was suffering and was on the brink of divorce. I remember thinking, wow. And I thought that my trauma was bigger than everyone else's. The father of somatic therapy, Peter Levine, says that trauma resides in the body more than anywhere else. Regardless of our traumatic incidences, most of us are operating from a fight, flight, or freeze response, meaning we are not living in the now, the time that truly counts. One person's trauma does not outweigh the other. It is how we choose to respond to it that truly counts. According to the National Council for Behavioral Health, 70% of adults have experienced at least one traumatic event in their life. 70% of adults. Why don't we talk about this? Do we fear that in speaking up, we will be shamed or ignored, when in reality, all we want is the space for us to be heard and to heal? My auntie would often giggle when she said the words, "Uncle's favorite girl." These words would make me freeze dead in my tracks whilst playing with my siblings in Sunny Hut, Nigeria. For these words meant that my uncle was in town. He lived in a different state, and when he was over, he would stay with us and typically sleep in the spare room. I was around 7 or 8 years old when Uncle would call me into his room. Here, he would abuse his power, his sexual power over me, causing me to lose mine. That event took away my voice, I literally couldn't speak. And when I tried to, at that age, I just wasn't heard. Fast forward to 2012. I'm now in London, England, and I hear my uncle is around. I'm now in my 30s. I am more confident in who I am. Yet the thought of him and I being on the same continent made my body tense. I later find out that uncle is looking after a young girl in the family. I froze. And I heard a voice, my higher self, say, "This is why you speak. This is why you use your voice, because in doing so, you get to free others." We all have a story, and based on the stats, most of us will experience a distressing or disturbing event. For some, it might be a one-time event known as shock trauma. For others, it might be more complex trauma that sees itself play on repeat in our lives. Most of us are trying to avoid the disturbing conversation around trauma. And that's because it forces us to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I want us to explore an idea. What if we have a choice in how we respond to our traumatic events? What if we make the choice to transform our trauma as opposed to transfer it, especially to future generations? When I reflect on my traumatic event, I make the conscious choice to ask self-empowering questions as opposed to self-blame. We can no longer thrive with a victim mentality, but we can collectively transmute our pain to power and be the catalyst for change that the world so desperately needs. What if we could take our power back just by acknowledging what we went through with a view that it could serve humanity? Could we view the world differently then? Could we be kinder to ourselves and each other? Having our trauma serve us and others is not a new or novel idea. There are people who have come before us, and some still with us today, who made the choice to transform their trauma. And as a result of their transformation, they have contributed to the world in tremendous ways, ways in which we need more of us to do today. Nelson Mandela. Without his decades of confinement, he wouldn't have crafted those words he so eloquently shared with the world. Rosa Parks. Without her audacity of hope and use of her voice, I may still have to sit at the back of the bus. George Floyd. Without the sad loss of his life, the world may not have been triggered to open its eyes and use its collective voice for change. That little boy who lost his goldfish, his trauma is no smaller or bigger than mine, for the body keeps the score. And our priority must be to resolve our trauma so we can unearth the gifts we have to give to the world. Here are 3 steps for transmuting pain to power. First, acknowledge your trauma and use your voice to release the power it holds over you and others. Second, awaken to the possibilities on different perspectives for healing. Third, transform by asking yourself the question, what lesson can I learn from this experience? Then go out there and be the change you wish to see in the world. What if resolving our greatest tragedy, our deepest suffering, ends up being the greatest gift to humanity? And what if we did it with compassion? Can we face our trauma then in a new way? We may not be responsible for our trauma, but let's empower ourselves to be responsible for the healing of it.